lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan. Back with me again, my boy Manny. We are going to talk JLA Tower of Babel by Mark Waid, Howard Porter. One of my favorites. Obviously, I love talking some DC with you, dude. We talked about JSA. I know there's a couple other ideas that we've kind of, or stories that we've kind of discussed and maybe talking about in the future, but Tower of Babel is a no-brainer. I think it's one of the best JLA, one of the best like Batman stories.
I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, so just a quick recap for, I mean, obviously this story is years and years. I would imagine like 20 years old. I don't know.
Yeah, because I remember I read this when I was binging. I started buying the trades from Morris. Morrison started the JLA run, and I remember I was buying the trades for that. And this came after Morrison left the title, so I read this in that same time period, and it must have been like early 2000s, easily maybe 2002, 2003, sometime around there.
Yeah, so for me, like
maybe even earlier than that. That's when I read it when it was selected. So I'm talking about like this is probably, yeah, you're right, about 20 years ago.
I feel like it might be actually in 2000. Oh, yeah. Okay. And I'm looking in the indicia and it says 98, 99, 2000. So I'm assuming 98, 99 because it's a deluxe edition that I'm reading out of. So I'm sure those are the other stories because Mark Waid did a 3-parter, a 2-parter, and then like you said, he took over, I think, fully for a little while. I think he did a couple arcs. But I remember like this was middle school for me. So I wasn't like, I had a pull list, but I wasn't allowed to have a lot of books on it. So I'd still get, and this is when like bookstores were everywhere. So I don't know if you remember like Walden Books.
Oh, totally, man. Yeah.
Okay, so there was a Walden Books like down the street from my house. So I always used to like walk there. I'd get like Goosebumps and shit or whatever other books I was getting back then, and I'd pick up random single issues. And
yeah, because they used to have a little spinner rack at Walden Books.
Yeah. So I picked up the second part of the story, and then there was a comic book store that was like down the street. I was able to get the first part, but I remember for years like I didn't have every issue of it. It took me a little bit to find it, but I remember just like loving the first part that I had read. And the short of it is the JLA gets taken out systematically in such a brilliant way, and then spoiler alert, it's Batman that had devised these plans, and this had come out, and I don't, you've read JLA Year One, right? By Waid. Okay, so like that was what was cool, is like this was kind of around the same time, but there's even like a scene in there, right, where like Aquaman's calling out Martian Manhunter. I'm spoiling another story, so
you said it's a 2-decade-old story.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to do it, but like, if you haven't read this story, like, I'm sorry if I'm spoiling stuff, but I love the interconnectivity of DC back then. Like Mark Waid, like he pulls from not just his own stories, but he'll pull from stuff all along the history of the DCU, and he's continuing to do it. I mentioned World's Finest in our Best of 2022, and he's continuing to do it to this day. But I just think like Ra's al Ghul, well, however you want to say it, has always been like a villain that I really dug, and I think this is where it started.
Like that's where it started for me too, man. To me, this is like my Ra's al Ghul story, because I know he was big back in like the mid 80s when they were really using him. I think Denny O'Neil and all these people,
and
like
Neil Adams, in the 70s, I think, even
started pumping him out. But I never really read those until way later. You know what I mean? And I've even read just a few of them. I mean, I always knew who Ra's al Ghul was, but to me, this is a story that really introduced me to him as a villain and really made me like him as a villain, where I almost consider him as much of a nemesis for Batman as a Joker, like.
Same. I think he's a better, in my opinion, like I like Joker, but I think he's overplayed a little bit too much. I think it's the easy go-to villain for a Batman story, and sometimes I think it's kind of a lazy choice unless you have something that's really original and different than we've seen before, which is, it's kind of hard, I think, at this point, because he's been around for
as
Oh,
long as
not
Batman.
yeah, not 80 years, maybe 80 years. And I think they did that 80th anniversary. Anyways, but Ra's al Ghul, like the way when he goes after Batman, he does it in like an intellectual way, kind of,
Yeah,
like, and he's the villain. Like, I don't ever understand the Joker and his point of view.
yeah,
Ra's, I do. Like, I
yeah.
get, like,
Exactly, exactly. Like Joker is almost too much of an extreme agent of chaos and anarchy for like any like sane person, like to really sort of understand his motivation. I mean, on a conceptual level you do, but
mm,
but Ra's al Ghul is just like you, even though his methods are messed up, you sort of get where he's coming from. You're like, all right, well, I get it. You know what I mean? Like, and he's like that great villain that in his eyes, he's the hero of his own story, and he's trying to save the world.
yeah,
And there's so much I love about him, like little things like how he always calls Batman detective. Like I
yeah,
love that.
yeah.
He just calls him detective. And then when you throw in like Batman's relationship with his daughter Talia, and like Batman's relationship with Ra's al Ghul is so complex
Mm-hmm.
in a way, like that it makes it kind of a very fascinating
Yeah.
pairing every time
Oh
you
yeah,
see
the
it.
dynamic is insane because
Yeah,
he wanted him to be with his daughter. He wanted him to
yeah,
be like his heir and
yeah.
take
He
over
wanted him
for
to take
him.
over the League of Assassins. Like
Yeah,
he went all over the world looking for a worthy heir, and Batman is the only one that he believes is worthy and capable of not only continuing his legacy, but actually carrying out the things that Roz can't. Like it's almost like there's an element of like a disappointed father in Ra's al Ghul when it comes to Batman. Like there's a weird family dynamic there. It's
yeah,
like, and I really kind of noticed it like in this story, especially like when you think about like in this story, like Ra's al Ghul is keeping Batman distracted by stealing the coffins of his parents and threatening to put him in the Lazarus pit. I'm like, that's almost like no, I'm your fucking dad. You know what I mean? Like not these people. Like I'm the real father that you need, and real. I looked too much into it, but I sort of got that from it in this recent rereading.
I didn't pick up on that, but that is an interesting aspect of it because, like you said, he does have like that disappointedness. Like he it's not like he hates him. It's not like a villain hero dynamic, like where you
It is
hate
not at
them.
all, which is what makes it
And
such a cool relationship.
yeah, and I just think that like he knows he has to take out the most powerful people on the planet, and who else does? I mean, he sends Talia is the one that gets the stuff, I think, right from the
Yeah,
back
it's
of
I think it's in the secret files issue where like she's narrating it, and like, and
yeah,
that's a great issue, by the way, because it's such a great uh such a great example at something Mark Waid I think excels at is creating like exposition dumps, for lack of a better term, or info dumps, but without making them boring. It's very clever the way it's done. Like
mhm,
it's not just like here's a bunch of information. Like like it's almost done naturally with like the little files and Talia narrating and kind of bringing it all together. Like it's a great piece of writing, that scene. And you're right, yeah, it is Talia that sneaks in and
yeah.
steals all the information that he has on the rest of the league.
And what's crazy is like everybody that knows Batman, the comic, the character, whatever, however you know about him, he's a brilliant detective, right? And a master tactician. Like there's a reason why he's the only one with no powers, yet he's considered one of the greatest heroes, and he's on the Justice League with, for lack of a better word, like god
Yeah,
level people.
exactly. And
And
especially in this run where like Morrison sort of set up the JLA to be like a pantheon of gods, and that's sort of a concept that Mark Waid, I mean, he grounds it a little more than Morrison does, but he still does continue that theme of like the JLA being almost like a pantheon of gods. I mean, like in this title, the JLA is like watchtowers on the moon. They're literally sitting above the earth watching it.
yeah,
So
I was gonna say too is that it's it's crazy because like obviously Batman would come up with a plan, right? A backup plan. How do I defeat them and even myself if something happens? And so they also talk about that there was I think it was like a 5-week event called Silver Age around this time where Society of Villains, I think was the name of that group back then. They take over the bodies of the JLA. So I had read some of those. I didn't have every issue, but it was a story set back in that time period. And this is what Mark Waid used to kind of be the catalyst for Batman having devised these plans. But what's insane is that Mark Waid is the person that devised these plans on how to take out the JLA. So
No,
we're reading it as it's Batman, but he thought of these ideas and they're brilliant. Like
they
how he
are.
takes down each one, and he get like Green Lantern, making him putting the thing in his ring to make him think he's blind. So he told himself he was blind, which all he had to do, and then like how he gets out of it was just realizing like, no, I'm not blind. Like that's
Yeah.
insane. Or Wonder Woman like being trapped inside her own head and fighting a never-ending battle. Like all these things are just insane. Aquaman, fear of water, right? Like
Yeah,
I think
it's a story that only someone that is really invested and knowledgeable of like DC lore and history could write. Like this, like the only other person that could have written this is maybe Grant Morrison, and it makes sense that Mark Waid did because I see a lot of similarities them as writers, and like I know that they're friends, and in real life, and like they've sort of like ping ponged off each other before, and what I like about Mark Waid though is that yeah, he has all these things that Morrison can do, but there's also a lot of emotional details packed into this story. Like the dramatic element of like the sense of betrayal that the League feels is very well written into this story. It's
yes.
not just like a big action man's plans taking everyone down like that very personal feeling and hurt that each member feels is so well done, especially in the ending issue where they all vote Batman out like an episode of Survivor almost,
No.
like each member's reason for either voting to keep him in the league or voting to out him is so real to me, and so much the way that character would react in that situation.
Yeah, totally agreed. I thought that and it was interesting seeing who wanted to keep him and who didn't, and I'll never forget like the panel and the page is like ingrained in my head when Batman's
Same.
running through this that page, but also when Batman's running through the snow and he's like, I did it. I'm the one. And I'm just like, I remember being a kid and I was like, holy shit.
Yeah,
Like
that's a holy shit moment that I remember in a comic, and like Mark Waid's writing is great, and like we haven't talked about else on this title and on this arc, and like he's so good in this title at being able to draw like these big ass like like action packed moment, but like you said, like that panel, like you can see the desperation on Batman's face and like the anguish and like the oh shit, this is my fault, you know what I mean?
yeah.
And he's Batman, so his brain is already processing what the fallout of this is probably going to be, but he still has to deal with it. And like to me, all that is in that drawing, in that panel I mentioned of him running through the snow. Like I can close my eyes and see that page.
Yeah.
Like it's weird.
Yeah, like
It's so
whenever
cool.
I think of this story, I think that's the first panel that comes to mind. Like it's like hands down, like no matter what, I think Tower of Babel, I'm like boom, like Batman just fucking. Oh, and then that page of Superman when he's just like his hands are like this, and he's like fucking the red kryptonite has turned his body like his skin inside out almost, like
Yeah.
just completely exposed. And just, I mean, this story set up such a long time of distrust of the pantheon of like the Justice League trusting Batman. So it didn't just like end, like you said, like they voted him out. He didn't wait to find out the results though. He was already fucking gone. He's like, he fucking knew that like, how can you trust him now? How can you
Yeah.
be next to him? Even though like I understand why Batman would do this. Like to me as a reader, as a fan, like I get it. Even if I didn't read that story where the heroes took over, like what if somebody fucking mind controls? Like that happens in comic books. Like it's very easy. And I think that the things he did weren't ways to like not let them come back from it. Except Plastic Man. Plastic Man got kind of fucked. And that was another thing that
Mm-hmm.
I really loved about this was that Plastic Man's always goofy, dude. Like he's always joking, but when he gets fucking frozen and then shattered,
Because he feels all that pain.
yeah, he fucking hates Batman. There's no joking anymore. He's like dead serious for
I
me.
love the voting scene for him because, like, when they go to him, they're like, all right, well, Eel O'Brien to the league, he's the one that pushed for you to join, and Plastic Man's like, yeah, that's fine. He pauses for a minute, he's out.
Yeah.
Like, you can see it on his, and like you're right, because they usually draw Plastic Man with like a big goofy grin. And in that scene, he's like looking down, like sad, like you can see the anguish on him, man. Like that's for me, when I saw that panel, I really felt the sense of betrayal that they must have felt, and like I think this is one of the defining Batman stories. I know it's a JLA story, but like to me, it's something that, I mean, when I talk about Batman with people that aren't mainstream comic fans, and like what I always go, if you really want to read a good Batman story, I always talk about Tower of Babel. I always tell them. And when you tell someone that hasn't read it the story, like every reaction I get, I'm like, man, that's fucking cool. You know what I mean? Like that's what anyone that I've ever told the story to, like if I'm at work and I'm like talking about Batman with people or whatever, and I'm like, bro, there's this great story where this happens, and they're like, man, that's awesome. Like because it's such a great concept, but it's so much more than just a concept. Like he writes it so well. And like it's not even just a defining moment for Batman. I think it's a defining moment for the DC universe too. Like it definitely set a tone that for years, and you can still even see that element of Batman in Batman's DNA. Like it's gonna be an evergreen story, and it's one of my personal favorites. As much as I love Morrison's run of JLA, like this is as anything he did in the issues that led up to it.
Oh yeah, hands down, dude. I mean, like I love Grant Morrison's run. That's when I started. Like that's when I started picking up JLA. I think it was like maybe like in the 20s or something when I picked up a random issue. And then I don't know if you remember DC, like in the year 2000, they did these Millennium editions, like reprints. Yes. So I got the JLA one that way. But like I think at that point, like it might have been not a cover price book anymore. Like it was like a little bit more. And like I didn't buy back issues that were more than cover price back then. I was only buying, like I think they were like $1.50 when I first started collecting. So like I wasn't spending a lot. I remember getting a little bits and pieces, and then I started picking it up regularly for, it was either World War III or the arc before that. And then like I'd get like, obviously like when you're a kid, like you'd have like gaps, you'd have like one or two issues missing. But this is, when this hit, dude, this became my favorite JLA story. Like, it still is. Like, I don't really think that there's another JLA story I can point to where I like it more, or that resonated with me more, or even one that I've read as much as this. Like
I've read it. I mean, the only one that maybe comes close is Morrison's Rock of Ages, but like,
that was a good one
too. To me, this is a much more emotionally driven story, which is what makes it like so good to me. It's got like the high concept, high action, and it's got the emotional arc. And like another thing I remember about this story is back then, like I mean, like a lot of us, I was an avid reader of Wizard, magazine.
Yes.
And, at the end of every year, they would do like their best hero, best comic. I remember that year they voted Batman as the best villain of the year because of what he did in this story. And I'm like, that's actually what put that story on the map for me. I was like, because I wasn't reading JLA, I was. Yeah. And the trade had just come out, and I read that article, Batman Best Villain. I read that, and I'm like, I gotta read this fucking story, man. You know what I mean? I read it.
I remember that now, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember also like back then Wizard would put out these like these special edition like issues where it would just focus on like Wolverine or Spider-Man, and they did a JLA one. And I think I actually got that before I was picking up the JLA comic, because JLA was such a huge book at that point that they did an issue, and it was like, it talked about the different, I think I learned more from that about the arcs that Morrison wrote before I actually read the stories. I think Rock of Ages is the one with Prometheus, right? Where they take over the Watchtower, or is that a different one?
No, I forget what that one's called. It might be in the same like collection, but Rock of Ages is the one where Luthor like reforms like the Injustice gang, and then they steal I think it's called the Warlorwog, and like they sort of rewrite everything, and like Darkseid is involved, and it's like
that is a good arc. Yeah,
it's a very, very Morrison, like very Morrison. Yeah. And I think it's like part of it is narrated by like the Black Racer. Like it's a good story. But this one is a lot more accessible. Like this is a great story that you can even give to someone that's a casual comics fan, because I mean, yeah, there's a lot of DC lore in there, but most people now, after all the Nolan movies and everything, know who Ra's al Ghul is. He's a pretty well-known pop culture figure now. So it's an easily accessible story that's also deeply tied into DC lore. Not an easy feat, and another thing Mark Waid excels at is doing that, making things accessible but extra rewarding for fans.
Agreed. Yeah, I think I say that so many times because I was going back through some of the videos I have and I realized how much Mark Waid I have, and I almost need to make a Mark Waid playlist because he's constantly a writer I go back to, because it's like I enjoy reading his comics sometimes more than like any other writer, even though I wouldn't necessarily say he is my top favorite writer, but there's a joy that I get when I read his stories, and it's because for me, his superhero stories always hit for me. Like it's very rare where I read something by Mark Waid from the big two that I just don't dig. I kind of wish that he'd do JLA again. I mean, I know he probably won't. I know he's got other stuff, like he's got World's Finest. He's doing a new Shazam book that's coming out this year. But JLA to me has not been like, this is the high watermark. It hasn't been consistently a great title since this initial run that Morrison started. I feel like it went from Morrison, it went to Mark Waid, and I think Joe Kelly took over after that.
That's when I dropped off. He had some interesting ideas, but I just didn't keep up with it when he wrote it.
Yeah, I think I read basically that whole run. I don't think I ever completed it in terms of like getting all the back issues. But yeah, I think that like that to me, from beginning to end, was a pretty solid run. I liked when Jeff Johns wrote it, but it took so much away from like the JLA's history together that I'm like, it just didn't hit the same. And then Scott Snyder was cool too, but like I liked the relationships that they had in this, I liked the history that they had in this. And I think especially when they expanded the team, they added like Steel and Huntress. Like I loved that shit. That was Orion and Big Barda. Like that was such a dope fucking team, dude. And
because they were like characters out of left field, but like they were so well written and integrated that like it just felt like natural, like. And I like it when you start off with a big seven, but they slowly sort of brought in these other characters that, like you said, expanded the league into like a very interesting team.
Mm-hmm.
The dynamics in this team, the one in Tower of Babel, is probably my favorite team dynamic that the league has had.
Yeah, I know. I miss like Kyle, Wally. Yeah. I like this version of Aquaman where he was still kind of angry as fuck all the time, like with this fucking hook hand. And then Plastic Man just being. Dude,
I was about to say, I love him being in the league.
Yeah. I mean, dude, he precedes Elongated Man. I mean, he first came out in, I think, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think it was like 1940. And Police Comics #1 was like when he debuted. And he's just like, he's one of the most powerful characters but he plays himself like such a jokester. I mean, look at they used him in Metal, in the Snyder book, right? When they finally brought him back, which I was really excited. I mean, they're not utilizing him as much, but he was such a great kind of addition to the Big Seven because he never took anything too seriously, and he'd always kind of like dig at them, and like annoy them, but it was always like done in a way that didn't come off as obnoxious,
And I want to go back to Howard Porter for a minute because I mean he does some stellar work in Tower of Babel. I mean he did it throughout his entire run and he always does, but there's a lot of great scenes. Like I love his depiction of Ra's al Ghul in this. Like he's so good at, like I think I said it earlier, so I'm probably like repeating myself here, but he's so good at drawing these big action scenes. But when it comes to drawing the quote unquote acting of the characters, he's really good too. Like you mentioned the scene of Superman with the red kryptonite, like the anguish on his face.
Yeah, look at that,
right
dude.
There, man. I mean, like you can see that, man. Like it's grotesque and like it does have the effect, and like that that's just a drawing. I mean, the face is the center right there of the image, and like you can see it. He's very good at that. Also, like I love the scene of when they find Kyle like just sitting in his room, like who's there? I can't see. Like again, Kyle's someone who usually has kind of a smile on his face. Like no, in this scene, like the way his eyes look, it's very haunting. Like it's easy to lose track of Howard Porter's attention to detail because he draws these big scenes, but he's also very good at the little tiny details. He's one of the better mainstream superhero artists out there, and this is probably his best arcs, man.
I agree. I think that he became like an artist I looked out for.
Yeah,
because of the JLA run, and then when he teamed up with Jeff Johns on Flash, it was like so there was the Blitz story arc, and then there was the Ignition story arc where Hal Jordan Spectre had erased the world's memory of who Flash was, and then he gets his memory back, and then starting like I think it was issue 207, then Howard Porter joined, and I was just like, I loved his, because not everybody to me can depict speed well. And I know this is kind of like really nerdy, but like I like the way he depicts the Flash and his world of characters. And I think he's just he became one of my favorite Flash artists because of that arc. And I just the energy and the crackle of like all the different energies, like speed, or just the way you see like Kyle's ring when he's like doing a construct, and you see it like it's kind of like sparkling out of the ring. He really like is just one of the best, I don't want to say blockbuster style type artists, but he does depict those like massive things like World War III.
This was from an era where like DC was really going for I just wanted to show it before I lose track. Another page it's the anguish on Batman's face when he sees the coffins being lowered, his coffins being lowered into the Lazarus pit. Like it's like the wide eyes of the mask, like the way the mouth looks, you know what I mean? Like it's great, man. It's great. Like I found myself smiling at it when I was reading it again. Like
because it's crazy because like Ra's al Ghul steals the plans on how to take the JLA down, but Batman, like, how do you take him down? How do you fucking get at him in a way that like he's fucked? He took his parents. He dug them up from the grave, and or like, what is he gonna do? Because like he could do the wrong thing, and those things are in there, and then who knows what happens? Like they're dead. Usually, it's like you're injured, you go into a Lazarus pit, you get healed, but you get a little fucked up in the head. You're crazy and shit. But what happens to these
dead for a while? You know what I mean? So like,
it was just such a like.
It's honestly like one of the best plans I've ever heard of how to sort of like knock Batman down a notch. You know what I mean? Like it's purely psychological, which is so great on Mark Waid's part to come up with this concept, because like how do you attack Batman? You in Ra's al Ghul, but it's Mark Waid as a writer. It's like you go after his heart, man. You know what I mean? Like you go after the one thing that he really probably truly cared about is his parents.
Yeah, he's the only one that could, because he's the only one that knows he's Bruce Wayne. Like no other villain could have done that to him other than Ra's, And
it's great because he doesn't try to expose him or anything. Like it's very personal. It's a very personal attack, which that's why I mentioned like the whole father figure thing, because it's almost like the kind of thing only a family member would know, and like only a family member could fuck you up that much, and like Batman, Ra's, and Talia have always had like a weird family dynamic, and I think it's very prevalent in this story. Talia does love Bruce in a way, like she's always calling him his betrothed, all that is in here, and Mark Waid is able to sort of build on what was created by Neil Adams and company, in the 70s, 80s with Ra's al Ghul. And I think for a lot of people, you mentioned it, I think for a lot of people of our generation, this was our Ra's al Ghul introduction, and our concept of Ra's al Ghul might have started here, like the master technician, like Batman, like the whole like relationship he has with his daughter. All that stuff is in here. This is a very important story when it comes to DC history.
Yeah, this is a story that should, I think, always be in print.
And I think it will be. I mean, like you said, you read the deluxe edition, so did I. I even think one of the DC animated movies might have adapted some of these concepts. I haven't seen all of them, but I want to say that there is one that sort of used they might have changed a bit of it, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone can comment on the videos or something, or if you've seen all of them, let me know. But I do think that concept of Batman's contingency plans being used to bring down the league has been used in one of the animated movies.
I feel like you're right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was a direct adaptation of Tower of Babel, but I know that the concept was used outside of the comic, and that's a sign of something that is, if it's good enough for DC to try to put in a more mainstream project like that, it's good, and like I said earlier, it's at this point everyone knows who Ra's al Ghul is, so you can hand Tower of Babel to just about anyone, and I think they'll have a good time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think I can really add anything other than what I said, other than I think it's just one of the best, not just JLA stories, not just Batman stories, but one of the best DC stories in the history of the publisher. I think it's, like you said, evergreen. I think you can hand it to a casual fan, somebody that hasn't read it, and you can just have a surface knowledge of these characters and just understand oh, okay, Aquaman, he needs water. Oh, that's a great way to take him out. Each way that they're taken out is not so crazy of an idea that you can't understand that that's a good way to take them down.
It's exploiting the weaknesses and powers that any casual person will know about the character. Everyone knows Batman, Superman is weak. Most people by now, Martian Manhunter, that fire is his weakness. Same with the lack of water. And he uses that. You can tell Mark Waid really thought about this story and pulled out all the stops in his menagerie of writing tools that he used, and probably one of my favorite Mark Waid stories too, man.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's in my top 3. And it's such a short. It's only 4 issues. You know what?
I was surprised at that when I reread it. It seemed longer, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It seems so epic, and I'm like, you know what? And it's great that it was 4 issues, because it was also written at a time where you had this decompressed storytelling that at the time I kind of liked, but when I look back now, I'm like, you know what? A lot of these stories could have used some editing and maybe been a few issues shorter. And I'm like, wow, this was 4 issues, and he packed so much action, so much drama, so much detail into those 4 issues that you're left feeling man, I just ate a fucking hearty meal here. It's great, man. It's great.
Yeah, I agree, dude. I think like I said, if you haven't read it, go pick it up. We've spoiled it. Sorry, but that doesn't take away from how good the story is. The story's been out 22 years now, 23 years. So make sure you pick it up. I know you
see it everywhere. Every bookstore I go to that has a graphic novel section usually has this collection in there, man.
Yeah. I think it should be easy to find. I didn't get it from the shop. I got it, online from eBay, because I was on there. I'm like, oh fuck, I found it for a good price. But go pick it up. Check it out. It's dope. Mark Waid, Howard Porter, one of the best JLA Batman stories you'll ever read. And that's all I got, dude.
Yeah, same, man.
All right, cool.
Looking forward to talking about it, and you should definitely pick it up. This was what we talked about it when we talked about JSA. This was a very fertile period for DC. Mm-hmm. And this is another example of how much they were kicking ass in the late 90s, early 2000s, and one of the best stories to come out of that period. And that says a lot, because there were so many fucking good DC comics coming out of that time.
Yeah,
and the standout. So that should tell you how good it is.
Yeah, agreed. And make sure, if you're not following Manny and myself, I'm going to drop all our links down below. I don't need to give the whole spiel. Make sure you also subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date on all the new vids that we got coming up. And on that note, we're out.